Hey traders, Michael or Minifrost here. You're here for another episode of Common Sense Market Analysis. Today is Thursday, October 2nd, 2025. You're looking at a daily chart of the SPY or spiders, which is the proxy for the S&P 500. What do we have on the docket today? As always, we're going to go over the spider, the longer term and shorter term perspective, and stay tuned because we're going over a real example of a trade that we had today, and I'm going to explain how we got the trade set up and the numbers. So that's definitely something to look forward to today. And then we'll get into some other stuff. We'll take the trip around the world as usual. So without further adu, let's jump straight into it, starting with the S&P. I see some angel numbers today. We're up 0.77 cents. That's 0.12%. And we had some very low participation today. You could take a look at the volume right here, and it's pretty low compared to the last few days / weeks. And yet, we're still grinding up higher, making new all-time highs. Today we made a high of 670.57, and you'll see in a moment when we go over inside the numbers, talking about the shorter term perspective, some of the things that happened intraday, and we came up into a pretty important overhead resistance level. We'll go over the exact numbers, but the main number that was important was a big fat round number at 670. Yes, these big fat round numbers do work. You'll see that later. So as traders, one of the most important things that we can do is to get different perspectives amongst different time frames. Because what might be going on a 15, 30-minute time frame can be totally different than what's happening on a 2-hour, daily, even higher up time frames like a weekly chart. So we always need to get different perspectives on what's going on. So right now we're on a daily chart, and just looking at today's candlestick, yeah, we had a little bit of some downside early in the morning. We went and filled this gap right here, and then we finished up 0.12%. But now, let's go over to, let's say, an hourly time frame. We could get rid of those moving averages. We don't need this line anymore. And now, we start to get a little bit of a different perspective as to what happened today. And this is exactly what she did. She ran a test of the most recent breakout area. These highs right here. Spiked it by just a touch, but that was pretty much what she did. Markets love to come back and retest the most recent breakout areas. And she did indeed find support. It might not have been clear on a daily, even a larger time frame, and that's why it's so important that we need to take a look at all of the different time frames. It just gives you a more clear picture, a clearer perspective on what's happening. So if you guys have been watching the videos and paying attention, you know about this number on the board, 660. That is our longer term / medium term pivot number. Staying above and closing candles above, which we've been doing for the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days so far, that is the bull case scenario, and she could just continue to grind up higher, making new all-time highs. But with that said, the pivot is still not out of the question. The market can still come back and retest the pivot. It is indeed an important number. I'm not saying we have to get there tomorrow, or the next day on Monday, or maybe it's going to be the following week. We don't really know. But what I do know is that number is important. It's a big fat round number. The market has already showed you that it's important. Take a look at the lows right here and right here. The low is at 660.27. The next candle is 660.37. We touched it right here. That low was 659.67. So that is a magnetic number. The market's been coming back to that number for a while now. The first time we closed candles below it, price went down to the 20-period moving average that is home base. We haven't touched that in a while until that day. And then she ran a test of the pivot towards the upside. Didn't quite get there, but that was the destination, the target towards the upside. And then the next day we closed candles above it, but we opened right on the pivot. And just throwing it out there that the pivot does fall in line with the 20-period moving average. Another thing that she could do is go ahead and run a test of yesterday's breakup candle low at around 663.30, give or take. But remember, we are in a very, very strong market. We're above all the moving averages. We're staying above all the longer term pivot numbers that we mentioned. So really, she can keep going until she doesn't want to. But we do have one number up above, a mathematical number that I worked out towards the upside, where she could find a bit of overhead resistance. And guess what? Inside the numbers and live room members have that number ready. All right, let's take a quick lazy swing trader intermission break. Now here's something a little unusual. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen once in a blue moon. So we had EOG Resources as one of our new swing trade alerts. As you could see, pretty much nailed it right on the money. Here was our entry alert, and I'll put the alert system on the screen so that you could see it for yourself. So we nailed the alert, and the first profit target was at 113.34. Today we made a high of 113.32. So we came up 2 cents short. So that's not to say that some traders didn't front run the number. We do have traders who do that, and that is totally okay, but it is a little unfortunate that we came up 2 cents short. Therefore, we did manually move the stop to break even so that we don't lose on the trade. At the time I'm recording this, it's approximately 2:54, so we're still trading near or around the entry level. Closing candles above is obviously the bull case situation. Just wanted to point that out there if you're a Lazy Swing Trader member, or if you're interested in the Lazy Swing Trader itself. This does happen once in a blue moon where we come up a penny, 2 pennies short of an entry or profit target alert, but that's just a trader's life. Not gonna let this one go bad on us. Let's go over the intraday activity for the spiders, starting with inside the numbers. We have a little bold action as you can see today, and today was one of those midpoint phenomenon type of days. You'll see what I'm talking about in a second. Here's some of the numbers you need to know. The morning pivot was at 66850. Above she's bullish, below she's bearish. We all know that. The pivot can be some initial support if we get down in a timely manner. Again, you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. And then here are the key things you need to know. We got the initial support zone between 66735 and 66630 with the midpoint phenomenon at 666.90. And then on the flip side, we had an overhead resistance zone towards 670 to 671 with the midpoint phenomenon in between. So here we go. To the right of the vertical line is today's activity. I know there's a lot of numbers on the board, but we'll go over this as simple as possible. The red lines right here represents the overhead resistance zone that was mentioned. The green line represents the morning pivot, and then the blue lines down below represents the support zone that we had. And here's what I meant by it was a midpoint phenomenon type of day. Right here in this overhead resistance zone, we managed to stop right on the midpoint phenomenon at 670.50. And then we came right back down. That was key overhead resistance. And then I did mention in the notes that the morning pivot could be some initial support if we get there in a timely manner. Right here, we did come up a tad bit short, around 25 cents short of the number. So on the second time around, the trade is different. It's not the same trade. We're either looking for a spike of the number or down to the next support area. In this case, price did spike the pivot by a touch, gave you right around a base hit, around 50 cents give or take, and then came right back down to the support zone. Where did we find low of day? Right at the midpoint phenomenon number at 666.90. And then where do we go right back to? You guessed it, the pivot. Guess what? Today was a perfect example of I know my freaking numbers. The numbers work. At the time I'm recording this, it's about 3:30. There's 30 minutes left of the trading day. As you can see, we're just eating time off the clock. She's either going back towards the pivot or going towards this overhead resistance zone again. I highly recommend you pause the video, read the notes, and go back to the chart to double check the work. There's a lot of stuff in here, a lot of intraday notes, a lot of numbers, a lot of price action. And let me tell you this, if you're a trader who's trading the S&P, the Qs, IWM, SMH, gold, crude, Bitcoin, oil, it doesn't matter. We have an opportunity for everybody. We have the commentary, which you guys just saw. We have stocks on the move. Let's go take a look. Today we had 3. 2 of them did hit their entry targets. We had True, TransUnion, and NWSA, News Corporation. I got something special for you guys for True, but let's go take a look at News Corporation. Alright, so we're looking at News Corporation. We got entry number 1 on the board. Never reached entry number 2, so we don't need to worry about that. But as you can see, we spiked it by a touch, 9 pennies to be exact, and we bounced it right in the other direction for a nice, pretty trade. That's News Corporation in stocks on the move. So again, if you need the numbers, and the numbers work if you can't already tell, if you need the SPY commentary, stocks on the move, whatever it is, you need to come check out Inside the Numbers / the live room. We have a list of 13 different markets with support and resistance numbers. And by the way, if you purchase the live room, you get Inside the Numbers for free. Alright, so the stock that we're going to check out today is TransUnion. By the way, if you have any stocks, commodities, other markets that you want me to take a look at, please leave a comment down below, and I'll pick the best one, or whichever receives the most amount of likes. So here we go. As you can see, we have 3 numbers already on the board, and it just so happens that TransUnion was one of the stocks on Stocks on the Move for Inside the Number members. And just by a quick glance of it, it worked out pretty damn good. So let's go over to the weekly chart and get a larger picture perspective. We'll go ahead and throw some moving averages on the board, and as you can see, we're below all of the moving averages. This week, TransUnion is getting absolutely killed. So we could scroll in a bit, so we could get rid of these moving averages. We know that we're in a downtrend below all of the moving averages, but we did manage to pick up a key support zone. And let's break it down on how I came to this conclusion to create the support zone. So one of the first things that I see that my eye is drawn to is this big time breakup candle low, especially on a weekly time frame where the larger charts are more dominant. And remember, all charts act and react the same way. The low of this big time breakup candle is going to be some support, at least for an intraday bounce, which we received. So we know that those areas are important, but what else are we working with? What else did we see that made this a high probability setup? Well, for starters, you had another breakup candle low right here in this vicinity, and then down below, and we could zoom in, we have this gap right here, and that was pretty much our second entry. And then the red line obviously represents our stop. We never made it to the stop. So what other things did we have to go ahead and build out the full stack situation? So we had some breakup candle lows in that vicinity, a gap that needed to be filled, and then here's a secret that most people don't know of. And it is indeed the magic calculator. The magic calculator operates on pivot highs and pivot lows, and then it spits out some support and resistance numbers that you can use to help build out the full stack. So let's go back to the chart and pick out some pivot highs. We can see that this one is a pretty obvious pivot high. This can be considered one right here as well. Another one right here. So these are all pivot highs where the market took a turn. So for this example, we could use one of the more recent pivot highs. So we could use this one, and the high right here is 99.39. We could also give that a little funny how that works. So we could go over to the magic calculator, put in the pivot high and hit calculate, and then it shoots out some support numbers. And it just so happens that one of the support numbers was 71.73. That was our first entry. I was 1 penny off, but you get the point. Can't split hairs over pennies. One other thing that I love about the magic calculator, and it's an extra tool in my toolbox to help me come up with some of these numbers. Remember, it's not something that should be used on its own. We use it in conjunction with other things, such as gaps, breakup, breakdown candles, fib retracements, and that's pretty much the basis of building out the full stack. We stack up the reasons upon reasons to give us a high probability trade setup. So with the magic calculator, we can use it on different time frames. We could use it on a 5-minute chart if we wanted to and look for pivot highs and pivot lows there, or we could go to a weekly chart, a larger time frame, and pick out a big time pivot high or low. In this case, we'll pick out a pivot high. For this example, we'll use this pivot high right here. The high is at 113.17. We'll go ahead and put that in the magic calculator, press calculate, and here are some important numbers you need to know. 70, 36, and 66.23. Alrighty, so I put these magic calculators on the board in yellow. Let's just go ahead and remove this stop. We don't really need that. So we have the 2 entries in blue and the magic calculator numbers in yellow. And this is exactly what I mean by building the full stack. The magic calculator number happened to fall in line right with our second entry, right around that breakup candle low and the gap that we had. So that's 3 things helping us build out the full stack. Look at the first one right here. The magic calculator number was 70.36 and we made a low of 70.20. And then not only that, if we go back over to the weekly time frame, reset this chart, here was the pivot high that we used on this larger time frame. The larger time frames are always going to be more dominant compared to the smaller ones. And look what happened. We almost nailed the low. The magic calculator number was at 66.23 and the low right here is 66.38. But take a look at this. What does this magic calculator number coincide with? This big time breakup candle low. we use it in conjunction with other things to build out the full stack. The Magic Calculator is another tool in your toolbox to help you find these support and resistance numbers. One of the most underrated tools we offer. Let's go take a quick trip around the world and take a look at some of the other markets, starting with Camp IWM. IWM is up about $1.50, 0.63%, and right here, this is the overhead resistance zone that we put on the board. And as you can see today, we did come up a tad bit short. That does constitute as a first time, best time situation. Now the second time around, it's a different trade. It takes the luster off of the trade. Now the second time around, we're either looking for a spike of the number, possibly getting towards the midpoint phenomenon, and very shortly you'll see that the midpoint phenomenon 100% works. It's something we use almost each and every single day. Or she could possibly make a run of the all-time high, which is at 247.18. Price can either come up a little bit short, maybe poke its head through by a little, and then come right back down. That's what we call a spike the high and rip it right back down in the other direction. So those are a few possibilities on the board. Another possibility would be to come back towards the 20 period moving average. That would be some normal garden variety behavior, and take a look at what coincides right at the moving average. That is yesterday's breakup candle low. We'll have support and resistance numbers for Camp IWM ready for Inside the Numbers and live room members. We do have some numbers up above in uncharted territory if we do get past this overhead resistance zone. That definitely is something to be on the lookout for. Take a look at this. We finally managed to touch the downward trend line in the transportation department. These two trend lines that we drew from a while ago, the transportation department has been trading within this triangle, and we marked the pivot number that's been important for pretty much the last 2 or 3 weeks, right here in this zone. And take a look at what happened. Well, first off, we're at 0.61%, but take a look, we ran them up right to the trend line and found resistance right off of it. And we also managed to touch the pivot number at the same time. The low today was 15,645 against our pivot number of 15,650. We'll give that a funny how that works in both sides of the situation. We are getting a little bit closer to the apex of the triangle. The apex of the triangle is where the two trend lines meet, right here. When we get to that point, that means time is up and the transportation department has to make its decision, whether they want to break above the downward trend line and have a leg higher, or if they want to break down below, test these moving averages right here. We got the 100 and the 200 period moving average coinciding with the upwards trend line. And then we also had a support zone in that area too. So we'll just have to wait and see. She still continues to trade within this triangle. What about the Q people? She's up 0.41%. She's up $2.48. She did go ahead and complete this gap from yesterday, and she continues to make new all-time highs. What a shocker. Very, very strong market. We're above all the moving averages, staying above all the pivots. If we take a look at a different perspective, let's go to the hourly chart, and we could put a horizontal line right at the most recent breakout area. What was the low? Right here. The low of this candle is 602.93. The breakout area, the line on the chart, happens to be at 602.87. So we came up a few pennies short. But we do not split hairs over pennies. We know that these breakout areas are important, and it's something that we use to help build the full stack. We had this breakout area. We also had this gap right here from yesterday. Probably could have picked another reason out, but that's all building the full stack. Other than that, not really that much else to talk about for the Q people. She can keep grinding up higher until she's done, until we get a sign and or signal of a trend change, which we've yet to receive. Here's what's funny. Yesterday I mentioned a big fat semi-round number at 340. That was the next target, and it was some overhead resistance. What was the high of today's candle? The high was 340. We'll give that a funny how that works / how do you like them apples. I'm telling you, these big fat round numbers, they work. That was a key destination for SMH. We're up $4.55, that's 1.36%, and no shocker here, we're still grinding up higher, making new all-time highs. Take a look at today's open, 339.66. For those of you who know, you know. Obviously, we have this gap from yesterday, that comes in at 333.69. Again, if you know, you know. And then down below, there's a line drawn that is yesterday's big time breakup candle low. Those are some key targets towards the downside. We'll have numbers ready for SMH for Inside the Numbers and Live Room members, and that includes the numbers in the uncharted territory. We were pretty spot on with the 340 number, and we'll try to be spot on again. The numbers work. With that said, we're going to pull the ripcord for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in for another episode of Common Sense Market Analysis. I'm Mini Frost. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, as it helps me and the channel out a lot. Please leave a comment below if you want me to take a look at any stocks, commodities, different markets, whatever you want me to take a look at, leave a comment down below. So with that said, I hope each and every single one of you has a great rest of your day. Stay safe and take care now, folks.